Hey everyone, do I have a semiconductor for you? You're watching TechStrong Gang. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday's TechStrong Gang show. I'm Alan Schummel, and it's great to have you here. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking a lot about the semiconductor market. New report out of Futurum we're going to dive into, and we've got some other great things to talk about. Clean energy, a report from a class trip to share by our own Stephen Foskett, and more. Let me introduce you to our gang for today, though, that we're going to discuss it with. I mentioned already the man from Ohio, Stephen Foskett. We also have, we didn't know she's also from Ohio, a Cleveland gal, Kate Scarcella. Chris Blask, Dan O'Brien's joining us. He looks like he's back home in the Boston area. And Mike Vizard from a dark cave somewhere in Las Vegas is what the word is. But gang, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right into it. Mike, I mentioned the new report came out from Ray Wang over at Futurum. It was kind of an update to his Q1 snapshot of the semiconductor data center business. And it's gone, I think in 2024, the number was $230 some odd billion. And by 2029, forecast to go to $500 billion. So almost double in just a couple years here, 4 years. I wrote an article, actually I wrote two articles, one on TechStrong IT and one on TechStrong AI. The summary of the report, I think, is available on Futurum Research, but what do you think?
Well, when I was small, 500 billion sounded like a lot of money, but these days I'm not entirely sure. So Dan, kind of walk us through this report a little bit, if you would. And is it your sense that this is a huge number, or is this kind of like just steady as she goes? This is the course we're on.
I think it's a good number. Encourage folks to head over to the new Futurum website and sign up for a kind of early peek at this. For all of our subscribers logging into the Futurum Intelligence platform, you can see the report right there. Listen, I mean, I think it's pretty well, regarded. The consensus is that, you get $1 trillion semiconductor market coming up in just a couple of years. So, half of that spending coming from the data center, certainly passes the sniff test for me. That's about a 22% compound annual growth rate over the next few years. So, relative to the results that we're putting up, and obviously we got NVIDIA earnings tonight, so we'll check in there and kind of see how things are tracking. But I think it's a really reasonable number. Really not just coming from the GPU side, though. Ray really kind of highlights the growth coming from the XPU side as well. You see these custom AI accelerators taking some share, particularly on the inference side. Companies like Broadcom, Allchip, MediaTek, Marvell. A lot of growth happening there. It's the number one driver in the market right now, right? It seemingly feels like the entire economy is kind of, resting on the AI infrastructure build out. We've got, $1.5 trillion in AI CapEx committed, across kind of the large hyperscaler set over the next few years. Feels like a very reasonable forecast to me.
There's a question in there I wanted to add to that, though. Do these numbers take into account what we're seeing on the political front? And are we moving towards a world where, each semiconductor company is going to have a version of the same chip that they're making in different markets to comply with different political and economic rules and regs? And is this number low?
It could prove conservative. I mean, I think, anybody who's forecasted this market, the last several years has probably, ended up having a conservative view relative to reality, right? Obviously, you see that in the market and, just the growth trajectory of, companies like NVIDIA and their supply chain. But, I think you're kind of alluding to Intel, the government support behind Foundry. Listen, dual sourcing is nothing new in the semiconductor industry, right? We've gotten away from it in more recent years where, TSMC has really kind of owned a lot of the designs. But, think back to the big Apple boom when, the last big, driver of the semiconductor market in the smartphone was happening. You had Apple dual sourcing across Samsung and TSMC with their A-series chipsets. So, I think the design companies would love to see, those variations where you've got, multiple different SKUs kind of happening out of different foundries to comply with this sort of stuff. I think you're seeing that trend happen anyway. Look at the number of chips within a TPU family generation to generation. The broad trend in the market is more heterogeneous compute. It's more custom built for the workload. And, certainly some of these new requirements around where things are made and, the export restrictions around it, that's only going to accelerate that trend, I think.
So, Mike, I have a few thoughts on this. So, and I had a chance to Slack with Ray, actually, didn't actually talk, we Slacked, and, read the report. Couple of things. First of all, it very much is an all-in, right? That $500 billion number could just as easily be $600-700 billion if AI goes hog wild, right? I think it's a conservative number in that scenario. By the same token, we're seeing a lot of people starting to rain on AI parade a little bit. It's become fashionable to become a doubter all of a sudden. And if that market slows down, you might see only $300 billion or something less than $500 billion. So I think we're at everybody's put their chips in the middle of the table here, and we'll see, what the inside drawer is, or what, I forget what they call it, and you're not the cards in your hand, the cards that are on the table. I'm not a poker player, as you could tell, but anyway, it's in there. I do think the whole chip sovereignty, if we could call it that thing, is going to be an issue. I wonder how many of these companies the U.S. will have a stake in, as the government. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But here's what I do know. I think we're going to see the world bifurcate in terms, not nation states. I mean the market. I think we're going to see the market bifurcate into companies that design chips, which is what we have now a lot, and companies that make chips. And quite frankly, that's TSMC's, that's their business. How long, I'll give Pat Gelsinger credit where credit's due. He recognized that is a market, a huge market. How long are we going to let them have it to themselves? We've got to develop the capability. When I say we, I mean Intel, but I mean other foundries. We need a strong, healthy, competitive, worldwide foundry marketplace where people do have choices to go to 2 or 3. Once I design my chip, I could have it built in 2 or 3 different foundries, if you will. And if we could get there, then you've got a real market. And you know what? I'm not a big fan of government ownership of means of production. I'm a free market guy. I'd love to see a market. What?
Right? I mean, TSMC is government backed. You've got the Japanese separate with Rapidus, government backed. Intel now backed by.
Well, there's a difference between government backed and government owned. But look, in Taiwan, that no one ever claimed Taiwan is, Singapore's a great country too, but people there give up their freedom for economic stability. That's not our way. But I'm not here to debate that. Yes, you're going to need governments involved in this, right? You need government blessing, you need government help. And it's more than that, it's a critical infrastructure imperative, a strategic imperative for governments to make sure we have that. But the best medicine we could have is a healthy market of multiple players so that the people who are designing the chips, the Apples and so forth, they have choices of where to go. And you may get some who are both. They both design and fab, like Intel always did. And more power to them as well.
I think for me, when I think about this situation, it's that, why we see billions being spent in the data center. My concern isn't the lack of demand, but the overbuilding. So I think that we haven't seen AI unleashed and what it can actually do. And so I fear that we're going to have all these huge data centers and and we're not going to need them because AI will improve everything that we do.
Yeah, that's a real good point, Kate, because one of the things that I've seen mentioned, people love to compare the current AI build out to the web build out or the fiber build out from previous booms. And yet, as you point out, one of the challenges here is, number one, that we haven't seen a really profitable application of AI yet. And that is despite the fact that the true cost of the infrastructure and power is not yet reflected in the product. But also, one of the things that gets pointed out by analysts is that a lot of the spending on capital equipment is on capital equipment that may, in fact, be obsolete in a few years by the time the market matures. So if we assume that AI will have productive and profitable applications, a lot of these things that are being built out may not actually be all that useful, and the investment may not come to fruition. Somebody pointed out the other day that you can currently buy a 48 gig A100 NVIDIA processor on eBay. Guess what? $2,500 buys you an A100 on eBay right now. And that's because it's effectively obsolete by the next generation that's already being deployed. Well, what happens when the next generation come out? Unlike, for example, the fiber boom, where all that dark fiber ended up being incredibly valuable in powering the internet as we know it, unlike even the data center boom, where things go obsolete, but they don't go obsolete next year, and not quite so radically. I mean, Google and Microsoft have announced that they're going to have 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 years of lifespan out of some of the servers that they've bought. Will we get 6 years of lifespan out of the AI processors that are being bought? I'm not sure.
No.
I don't think so.
I think you have to
either.
worry about that, the financial engineering of this all, right? I mean, companies, to your point, Stephen, are, depreciating these assets over 4, 5, 6 year timeframes. And, realistically, you could argue it could be a year or two is more realistic.
3 months,
So
yeah. Hey,
certainly
Chris, if your mic's back on, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll come out on the bullish side of this one for structural reasons. I mean, all the reasons you guys are laying out are accurate, but look at what we've been talking about in this forum, in this show over the last several months, right? We've been building up massive stacks. We use AI on massive compute, but really there's also the horizontal space. Now we've talked about the proliferation of other chips. And, this little thing, this little AI, I'm afraid to say its name because it'll be stupid, needs so much more power. So when I see, all the factors you're bringing up, geopolitical things are just driving it further. But we're maxing out on the verticality, perhaps in the processor space and usage, which is leaving all sorts of room horizontally. So I think generally speaking, this is right. I'll leave the in this particular topic, I'll leave the market analytics and timing to others, but it just feels right. There's going to be a lot more smart stuff in a lot more things. And that means a lot more chips, and they're not all the same.
Yeah.
To Stephen's point, though, when I talk to AI developers, I mean, it's amazing. When there's a new chip out, that's all they want. And they don't want to hear from the old chips. And they're just like, as far as they're concerned, they're like scrap heap junk already. So,
But why is that any different than it's ever been?
It hasn't. No, I mean, right. We always want the greatest. And
Everybody wants the latest and greatest. The Pentium, the Core, the i7. No, I want that i9. When's the i12 coming? Right.
But as Dan points out, these things are heavily financially engineered as well. And so it could very well be that we could both be right, that effectively today's CapEx build out may not end up being profitable, but the profitability of future applications may wipe out any, even the tremendous CapEx that we've made now. And to Chris's point, I totally agree with you. So much of this market is unaddressed. If you look at this report, all of these companies that are developing, the thing that makes me excited is to think about sort of what we're going to see from companies like Broadcom and Marvell and MediaTek and so on. Those are the companies that are going to be building just incredible stuff in all of these new fabs. There's an appetite for increasing compute everywhere, not just in
Agreed.
AI.
And I want to, if I could just drive that home a second, it's not just about NVIDIA's GPUs. This report, and do go check out the exec summary, and if you like it, get the whole report, subscribe. But this report makes clear that while NVIDIA is going to get their fair share and then some, right? Shed no tears for Jensen. But it's the Broadcoms, it's the up-and-comers like Marvell, it's a lot of these other chip makers or chip designers, players in the market who are going to reap the benefits here too. And you've got to be, if you're going to be smart about this market, you got to be familiar with those folks and what they're doing too. So I highly, highly encourage you. Go check it out. Someone else wanted to say something?
I just wanted to clarify one point about the separation of design and foundries, because I believe credit for that belongs to ARM. I think they started that whole trend.
They did. They did pretty good with it, I heard.
I think AMD might also deserve a little bit of credit there.
Yeah, listen, I mean, the fabless trend, has been playing out for, call it 20 years, right? The market's been moving that way. Where you see the IDM trend really still in play is not the leading edge. It's all the trailing edge. It's the Texas Instruments of the world.
Yeah, don't forget how many chips TI still does. A lot of calculators. All right. On that note, let's take a break here, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit about clean energy to power all these chips for $500 billion. You're watching TechStrong Gang.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back, and as Alan alluded, we're going to have a little chat about clean energy and big tech. The big tech companies sent a little memo back to Washington saying, please don't kill those clean energy credits. We need them to drive data center investments, especially around things like nuclear energy, which everybody and his brother seems to be now saying that they want to be a part of. Alan, I know you kind of looked at the space, and, I know you have opinions about what happens in Washington, but yeah. Do you think we can, save this clean energy credit thing? Because maybe it is one of the few bipartisan things that's good for everybody.
Wait, what's bipartisan mean even today? Stop. Just stop. There is no more bipartisan. It's ruled by fiat. But here's the thing. I happen to agree. I think, look, when 92% of the energy that came on last year, new energy that came on in Texas last year was solar and wind, it's a little bit crazy to try to just kick that to the curb. That being said, we don't have bipartisanship in our government, nor do we have rule by committees like that. It's whatever they decide, and they've decided that clean energy, and I don't even think they like to use the word clean energy. They don't like solar and wind, and we're not using it, God darn it. That's the end of it. The good news is that it's funny how nuclear energy has been brought in from the woodshed and is now everybody's little darling. And, I including mine, I'll be honest with you, I'm looking forward to see container-sized nuclear plants powering data centers, powering medium-sized cities. I think we've come a long way since 3 Mile Island and, in New York where I grew up, what was it, Indian Point, Mike, was the nuclear power plant? Never had a problem there. It supplied New York City with tons of power. But those were designed in the 50s and 60s. It's been a minute. We've made improvements. We need all good energy that we could get. If you buy into the $500 billion trillion semi market, we need all the energy production we can get, and nuclear might be our best bet. And given the current political climate, it might be the fastest road to getting there.
Yeah, I'm with you with nuclear energy. when I did my thesis for information security and securing the electrical grid, I actually went to nuclear plants to look at what we were talking about from a cybersecurity point of view. I love nuclear energy. I think it's this untapped. It's really something that we have been scared of. I think growing up because of 3 Mile Island, the movie China Syndrome, which some of you may remember. But it's good. I mean, it's nuclear energy, and at the same time, I don't think we should stop the wind projects that we have in the New England area. I think, like all technology, the more that we use it, the more that we understand it, the more that we understand, the more that we're able to understand storage capacity, and this almost leads me to I was going to say IBM and storage, but that's the next section. But Chris, what do you say?
Yeah, I'm a nuclear hippie, right? I agree with everybody else, and frankly, I've never been worried about nuclear power. In fact, as a young person, I thought I might spend some time with Greenpeace, and I talked to an actual Greenpeace person. It's like, save the whales. It's like, yeah, anti-nuke. Like, yeah, no nuclear war. It's like, no, we mean no nuclear power. It's like, wait, that's actually better. But to weave this into the point, the reason I'm bullish about the future writ large is that we have a million reasons to need the same thing, and that's visibility, right? It's not about supply chain security and knowing where your software bill of materials is necessarily, maybe, and it's not necessarily about knowing where you're green, you're impacting the environment because your usage and production of power, maybe, but it's all of those things sometimes. And the same systems do the same things. The late, great Shuli Goodman, in 2019, when Mehdi Ensazari and I first, had that angry conversation and ended up putting together the DBOM attestation ecosystem, we meant supply chain security. We had mainframe security, as we talk about in the next segment. But it turned out that Shuli wanted to had a system for carbon credits. How do you actually track them? Is it better? Is it not? Look, recycling, consumer recycling in my generation was mostly a scam, a feel-good scam that caused more pollution than it saved. Would have been better landfilling it all. I don't care what the answers are. I don't think any of us do, but we would like to know what works and what doesn't. And in each of these things, we're developing the ability to know, and then we can decide.
Yeah, the challenge, I've said for a while that one of the biggest challenge for nuclear is that it's frankly just not financially competitive with alternative energy sources. As of today, the projected cost for these small modular reactors is actually 3 times the cost of installing solar and batteries, and easily 3 or 4 times the cost of wind turbines or solar panels alone. And that is a big challenge. I said you can't put that genie back in the bottle because, money, essentially solar and wind are so financially competitive. It's actually cheaper to build out a new solar plant with batteries than it is to continue to power your old natural gas turbine today. But the challenge is apparently you can put that genie back into the bottle by denying permits and shutting down projects. So that's kind of where we're at. Given that, I actually am going to come over to the Allen side of the table and say, let's go small modular reactors. If we need something, and these things are, they are very promising. These are not your dad's nuclear reactors. These things are cooled with molten salt. They have, uranium in pellets that is much, much safer. Every aspect of these things is much, much more attractive. No, they're not financially competitive with alternative energy sources or even with natural gas and coal, but they are competitive in other ways. And if the externalities of especially fossil fuels were weighed in, these things would be more than up to their competition. And I think we need them.
Agreed.
Well, that's the word right. Sorry, the word right there, weighed in, right? We all, of all ideologies, all right, human beings, we just want to know. And I have chaired a lot of nuclear power conferences and so forth, Sellafields. Like you say, Stephen, the cost, no, they're completely out of line. That does not mean they will be forever out of line. I think we made mistakes in choosing fuel cycles in the 1950s, whatever, right? But whatever the answers are, it's not safe to be locked into anything. Our mainframe is right or wrong. Do we need more chips? So where did the power come from? None of us know. We do know, though, if we can see things clearly enough. not that much, but just enough to be able to see we can make reasonable choices on all these things. We don't have to take sides. There are no sides.
I don't think people really care whether it's clean energy, green energy, nuclear. I think that there's an imperative that we need more power and energy in the country. Like, we have created a new application that is incredibly power hungry, and I think the name of the game is just supply here. I mean, much like we've talked about in the previous segment, the ability to build leading edge chips is a kind of national strategic, imperative and strategic advantage. I think having a huge amount of excess power that we can generate to drive this AI thing forward, I think is also it's the end game, right? I mean, I think we're looking at a world where having, the most advanced AI clusters and quantum computing is, a strategic military advantage even. So I tend to think the name of the game is power at all costs. And, I think if you look at some of the math on, if you tripled the power cost, what that means to, joules per token, it's negligible in the grand scheme of things, given the scale of the investment and all the other areas that we're pouring money in here.
You said something, though, Dan, excess power. I think one of the problems we have is we have nowhere to store excess power. We need battery. I mean, this is a tech, this whole thing is a giant tech puzzle, right?
But on that note, as of right now, global battery supply is actually running 3 times demand. So we have actually excess supply of batteries right now, too. Amazing.
But our batteries aren't as efficient as they need to be.
Again, there's so much that, and Dan, we actually can care about multiple things at the same time, but I'm totally with you. And, look, everybody who wants to go live green in the woods and eat granola, we're going to use 10 times as much power. Get over it, right? Everybody who wants to burn coal, no, we can't do that long term either. Get over it, right? We just need to weigh these things out, right? There's so much room in the middle. We'll use a lot more power, and we'll use it much more wisely.
But
we're using power now.
Let me just raise my
efficient.
tree-hugging hand here for a second. And Stephen, I hope you will join me in this. Okay? You're 100% right. Dan, you're 100% right, too. That's why it's moronic to throw away solar and wind just because somebody doesn't like it, when it's probably dollar for dollar the most efficient one out there. Now, you want to get rid of you want to say, look, let's level the playing field. Let's not play favorites. Energy is energy. I don't care whether it comes from fossil fuels, sun, solar, nuclear, wind, liquid gas, fossil fuel, whatever. Dollar for dollar for dollar, where do I get the best bang for my buck? And that's where you go. Now, I'm not into doing coal.
It's not one size fits all, right? Different geographies, different use cases, different solutions. Right?
Exactly.
Coastal city versus the plains versus, the middle of the desert. Let's like we talked about in the previous segment around finding the right solution for the right workload. I think we're talking about the same thing on power.
Yeah, and another aspect that was in our notes here is, Microsoft is piloting a water-free data center. That would be great for Phoenix, Las Vegas, places where water is at a premium. I don't know enough about it, Stephen. I know you're my green man. What's that about?
Oh, that is such a great idea. Right now, honestly, it's very analogous to sort of the current state of nuclear versus the future of nuclear. We've been cooling our data centers using evaporative cooling because it's cheap, because we can pour water into it, and you pour a liter and a half of water equals, a kilowatt of cooling or something like that. Essentially, you evaporate some water, it cools, and you're good. Instead, but the problem is we're running out of water, especially in places where these data centers and fabs are being built. You look at Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, and even in places like Ohio and Virginia that have lots of water, we're still running out of fresh water in order to cooling, because it's just not in the right place at the right time. And again, it's one of those trade-offs. You look at it and you say, wait a second, just like power generation is inconsistent from renewable sources, and at night the sun doesn't shine. Well, then you got to put batteries, and batteries add a layer of inefficiency, and you end up wasting some power. Same thing with cooling. if you look at the cooling problem and you say, wait a second, let's stop pouring water in here and let's do air-to-air cooling. Yes, it requires more electricity, but it doesn't require that water. Okay, good, solved. Let's do it, right? I love this.
Excellent. All right.
I would just point out one thing to Steven's point about China, because when I talk to AI developers, and they go visit, one of the things that they come home and remark on is like, hey, nobody over there is freaking out about where they're going to find the power for their AI project.
Oh, it's global. It's not just a U.S. issue. But hey, we're over time on this segment. I want to come back. We're going to get our little field report from Cher. It's not so little. You're watching TechStrong, gang.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey folks, we're back and we're going to have one of our famous little field reports from when one of us went to visit somewhere. Stephen was at the Share conference, which if you're not familiar with is kind of I guess I'll describe it as an emotional support group for mainframers, but
Okay.
But Stephen, what's going on with these folks and what are you hearing on the latest and greatest on mainframes?
Sorry, my head just exploded. No, so Share, first off, Share is actually a remarkable thing. It is the longest running tech conference. I said it in the known universe. We don't know. There may be one running longer on Alpha Centauri or something like that. But here in the on our planet, Share is the longest running tech conference. It was started in 1955. So Alan, you're I think the only one that remembers the first. Anyway, no, it was started in 1955 before any of us were born, and it is still going strong. The other thing that I love about Share is that it is deeply, deeply technical, and to the name, very much about sharing. So if you love that sort of hacker vibe of KubeCon, where people are sharing their code and doing code reviews and stuff like that, Share is kind of like that, except as you point out, most of the people, in fact, pretty much all of the content is mainframe related. And you might say, mainframe? Isn't that just a term they misuse in movies? But no, actually, most of the world's transactional data still runs through mainframes. It's still a massive, massive business. There's big companies. I mean, IBM, obviously, but Broadcom derives a huge amount of revenue. Companies like Rocket Software are huge in this space, BMC. And those companies are still powering much of what the world is doing. Now, I went to Share last year in Kansas City. I missed one, and then I came back. This year it was actually here in Cleveland, which was tremendous. I think everybody loved Cleveland. It actually does rock. And the conference, the things that I want to zoom in on here from a content perspective are the many ways that Share is showing sort of the evolution of the mainframe. IBM, first off, has a brand new mainframe that's out and being deployed right now. It has AI capabilities. It's got accelerators. It looks very much like if you were to describe the hardware and forget to mention what operating system it's running, you'd think, man, this is a pretty cool new modern system. It is. It's running mainframe stuff, The other thing, though, that really strikes me about Share is that there's a generational change happening right now. I heard from some of the insiders at the conference, some of the sessions that are kind of closed door sessions, that essentially the old school mainframe folks are finally starting to say, you know what? We got to turn it over to this young generation, because the young generation is there. If you walked around, I looked old compared to a lot of the people in that conference.
You are, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Alan.
I owed you that, by the way, so we're even.
There are a lot of young people. It's a very diverse crowd. It's not at all who you might guess would be at a mainframe conference, and they're doing cool stuff. They're applying DevOps technologies. We heard a Tech Field Day presentation from a company called Pop-Up Mainframe that is on the leading edge of doing essentially, it's kind of like containerization, what containerization did to modern application development. They're doing that on the mainframe, right? We've got observability, we've got AI. We had Broadcom talking about how they're doing AI ops on the mainframe platform, and it is legit. It is like what you would expect from AI ops in the cloud or in open systems, except with a mainframe slant. And there's all sorts of new people. I mean, one of the big things that I focused on Wednesday was a lot of sessions on running Linux on the mainframe. There's a few different ways to do that. And it's not about basically having better hardware to run Linux on. It's about connecting all of those mainframe applications to the modern world, the open systems world through, Linux, basically as the bridge. That's just incredible. Now, I know that y'all have a lot of thoughts on that. I just wanted to kind of share. Those are my takeaways from Share. What do y'all think about the modern mainframe?
So I've been covering, look, I've always been like fascinated with DevOps and mainframes. Ever since, I started DevOps.com 12, 13 years ago. And I'll tell you something. We don't give IBM enough credit for what a fantastic platform that Z is. Right? So I have a good friend at IBM, Rosalind Radcliffe. Dan, I don't know if you ever met Rosalind over there. She's a brilliant, brilliant woman. All of their mainframe people I met over the years are, and let's face it, everybody in the mainframe industry worked at IBM at some point or another, right? Because that's the genesis of it. But you want to talk about taking a platform that is, I wasn't there in 55, Stephen, but it is, that old, but refreshing it, making it modern so that it was running containers before we ever heard of Docker. Let's be clear, right? Docker didn't invent containers. Mainframe's been running them forever. But it runs Linux, it runs Java, there isn't much it doesn't run. You want systems of record, systems of engagement, bifurcate your stuff, put some stuff in the cloud and make it, hum back here on the mainframe. It does it. IBM consistently refreshes this platform. Is it every 2 or 3 years, I think, is the cycle. It's 3 years, right, Dan? 2-year cycles. And every cycle is just rocking, rock solid rocking. We sit here today and there are a lot of young people who maybe want to make fun of it, but penny for penny, MIP for MIP, dollar for dollar, it's still your most effective platform for compute, for mission critical stuff. If security is important to you, if uptime is important to you, there still isn't anything that touches it. And just one last point about young people, Stephen. I'm glad to hear that you saw all these young people. I want to give a shout out to, within the Linux Foundation, a project called the Open Mainframe Project,
Yep.
OMP.
I saw them. I talked to them there.
Great
Yep.
people. My friend John there and the lady who runs their marketing. I did the Open Mainframe Project podcast for 1.5 years, 2 years with them. And they do an amazing job of education, of bringing up like scholarships to people. It's a funny thing. In India, they're turning out COBOL programmers like mad because they know they can get a job. There's a shortage of them. But the Open Mainframe Project, and I'll give them a shout out and also say they don't get enough support from IBM and BMC and Broadcom and Rocket, the big four in the mainframe space. We should have a better mainframe circuit, events, right? Share is share, right? It is a very unique conference and everything like that. But you look at what they do with KubeCon, right? Why can't we have that kind of buzz and craziness on mainframe? And the Open Mainframe Project's a great place to do it. But look, DevOps runs great on mainframes, right?
So Dan, let me ask you this question though, because part of the issue with mainframes isn't how robust the platform is. I think everybody knows that it's awesome, but the issue has always been the price of entry into that environment. And it used to be kind of $1 million. Now I think it's probably $500,000. Or where do you think the point of entry is? And that's why everybody winds up buying a bunch of x86 boxes.
I think that's changing, Mike. I mean, I think, Stephen alluded to it a bit earlier. There's a flavor of the mainframe called Linux One that takes all the Z hardware and, really creates an open system. You can run RHEL, you can run OpenShift containers. And I think as a lot of those x86 workloads are transitioning, certainly ARM is picking up the majority of them, but there's a lot of use cases where the total cost of ownership, really argues quite strongly for the Linux One and the mainframe system. You can check out some of the work that Signal 65 did on that. A lab project that the company did in concert with IBM on that to kind of prove that point. Listen, the only thing not modern about the mainframe is that it also runs really old code, right? Like it's got backwards compatibility like nothing else. Everything else about it is completely modern. It's got the highest clock speed of almost any chip out there. You're doing, quantum safe encryption. You've got, on-chip accelerators that are, doing incredibly low latency compute inside the credit card transaction window to detect fraud detection. There's an incredible amount of innovation that they're pouring into that system. And I think, in a world in which, we've all kind of recognized it's a hybrid world. We talked about this concept of heterogeneous compute, really finding the most efficient way for every workload. The mainframe, has really a lot of new life into it, with all these strengths kind of converging out there in the market.
It takes about 3 generations, for innovation to turn into infrastructure, right? And I think this is a fascinating example because it's 70 years out, from the first of the share conferences, right? The human generation is 25 years, right? So there's about 200 generations in human written history, say 500 since we started doing infrastructure. And as you look at these transitions, when somebody gets a crazy idea to start directing water towards the plants, right? And that works. There's a lot more food, and it booms, and it's a great time. And then there's a drought, and if you weren't the water management person, and the survivors will kill you, right? So you end up with standards and so forth. We see infrastructure maturing over and over, and everything in this show, all the episodes, we're doing that sort of thing. Hey, we've got AI that's going to use these crazy chips, so we're going to put a whole bunch of chips in one spot, but that's not a mature infrastructure. In OT, QuietWire today are using 15-year-old chips to run AI because, a small manufacturer does not need a Lumina class, emerging AI. They need Bob, who sits there and watches the files. That works perfectly fine. So in OT, historically, we've shown how this is done. In OT today, we're demonstrating it. And in IT, we still think, this is a new shiny thing. When it's infrastructure, now it's responsibility. That means writing it all down.
I find that the biggest problem that we had with the adoption of mainframes was actually just a lack of talent out there, a lack of people being able to actually run the systems. There was that the field was very small. So.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually one of the coolest things too. You mentioned in China. Well, here in the U.S. as well, there are a few universities that have basically mainframe boot camps, and in many cases they're smaller colleges, community colleges, that sort of thing.
Some historically black colleges too.
But let me tell you, people that graduate from those programs can write themselves a check.
And again, shout out to the Open Mainframe Project. They're the ones behind this. I forgot the professor who runs it at 2 or 3 different universities. I've interviewed him a few times through OPM.
IBM's helped a lot here too. They've created 2 AI tools. One to help on the coding skill set. COBOL to Java. Specialized AI models to help with the lack of COBOL skills and mainframe modernization. But they've also got AI tools for the operator side. Really, kind of democratizing that knowledge out there so that you can interact, in a natural language way and get the help you need on how to stay up and running.
So, Kate, let me ask you this, because when you talk to IBMers and mainframers, there's a little bitterness in the language because they essentially say, no one's hearing us. We just talked about all this great stuff that the IBM mainframe does, and yet, the market's dominated by all these other boxes out there. What can that IBM community do besides grouse amongst themselves about the fact that the rest of the world seems tone deaf about this?
Yeah. And for that, I would say, let's go back to Alan, because I do think, IBM and other mainframe companies really need to reach out to the Open Linux Foundation. They need to reach out to schools. It is so important for schools to start to train people, with the skills needed. So when they get out, they can write their own checks, So I think it's a matter of a community coming together and helping say, this is really good technology, and just getting it out there. I think it's important.
Yeah, and just as a quick call out, one of our folks around the Tech Field Day table, Jeffrey Decker, is a professor at Northern Illinois University, and he runs one of these boot camps. So if you're interested or you know somebody who might be interested, Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois, has just such a program.
Hey, guys, I got to call it. We're out of time. But just quickly, Stephen, the Tech Field Day videos from that you did share, they're available up on the Tech Field Day YouTube site, I assume, as well as on TechStrong TV.
Going up today. We just putting them through some review process, and we'll get them posted just as soon as we can. Good
man. You're pretty good for a young guy. All righty. On that note, we're going to end our show for today. Kate, Chris, Stephen, Dano, Mike, thank you. Enjoy your day, everyone. As usual, we've got TechStrong TV following this. Enjoy that. I've been looking at the Google Analytics on that. It's crazy how many people are watching or viewing, whatever, impressions, and all kinds of things there. But we hope you've enjoyed this and enjoy TechStrong TV. We'll be back tomorrow with yet more great coverage. Until then, this is Alan Schummel. We're out.